Good evening, everybody. We want to thank you for joining us today for our tonight, depending on where you are, I guess, for Engineering Change with Modern Figures, our second live episode in the series of God knows how many of these we'll do. But this one is focused on allyship in action. And I apologize, we're getting off to a little bit of a late start. We had some slight technical difficulties, but we're here now. So we're happy to be coming to you live this evening. I am Yvette E. Pearson. I am host of Engineering Change podcast, and I just want to share with you a little bit about why we're here. As everyone knows, in recent weeks, in light of all of the racial tensions that have really come to the forefront in the past, I guess, couple of months at this point, we wanted to bring together people to have conversations that will go beyond talking, but really get to where we can put some things in action to overcome the challenges that we've been facing with equity and inclusion in STEM education forever. We're happy to see that for the first time, a lot of people are having these conversations in ways they haven't before. But we want to also recognize that there are a lot of people who have been in the trenches, getting the job done and really trying to make a difference with the work towards equity and inclusion in engineering. And so that's what this whole series is about, to bring together those different perspectives, those ideas, those strategies, so that we can all learn and put things into action. I'll start first. Again, I'm Yvette Pearson. I'm host of Engineering Change, and I am founder and lead consultant of a company called the Peer Group, the Pearson Evaluation and Education Research Group. And I'm joined by my colleagues from Modern Figures podcast.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kyla McMullen. I'm a co-host of Modern Figures podcast, and I'm an assistant professor in computer science at the University of Florida. My research is in sound and virtual and augmented reality. And as I said, I co-host Modern Figures podcast, and I have a huge commitment to broadening participation in computing.
And I'm Dr. Jeremy Waisome, and I am a lecturer in the Engineering Education Department at the University of Florida. I also serve as special assistant to the Dean of the Graduate School in the Division of Graduate Student Affairs, where I work on issues of diversity on the kind of global graduate student scale at UF. And I am co-host of Modern Figures podcast. And Modern Figures podcast is a show where we are elevating the voices of Black women in computing. Yvette, you can change the slide. To advance the, never mind. Ha ha ha.
I was trying to let you go.
Oh, it's okay.
So I reordered the slides. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But we're joined here by three dynamic women, three dynamic scholars, consultants, and we'll start by introducing them and we'll dive right into our conversation. First, we have Dr. Amy Slayton, and she is professor of history at Drexel University. And Amy has been really not only a scholar, but also a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion in engineering education for forever. She has a number of books, a couple of which are Race, Rigor, and Selectivity in U.S. Engineering, the History of an Occupational Color Line, that was published back in 2010. And she's currently working on a book called All Good People, Diversity, Difference, and Opportunity in High-Tech America, which I'm excited to read. And Amy has been widely recognized for her work, including the 2017 ASEE Sterling Olmsted Award, which honors people who have made distinguished contributions to the development and teaching of liberal arts in engineering education. It's the highest award given by the Liberal Education and Engineering and Society Division of the ASEE, which is the American Society for Engineering Education. So welcome, Amy, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
We also have Dr. Colleen Lewis here with us, and she is an assistant professor of computer science at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and she researches gender and diversity issues in computer science education and how programming environments shape perception, learning, and goals. She also is the founder and maintainer, curator of CS Teaching Tips, which is an awesome website, csteachingtips.org, where she documents and disseminates effective CS teaching or computer science teaching practices. And they're made from interviews with computer science teachers, over 150 of them. They have about over 1,300 tips, and they've made about 11 best of tip sheets. So definitely check those out. We go around and tell people how to recognize, address, and respond to microaggressions that happen. So that's, we really enjoy doing that. It's always fun. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Colleen. Oh yeah, also she's the curator, as we have here, she's the PI and curator for CS Teaching Tips. Also the former McGregor-Durand Associate Professor of Computer Science at Harvey Mudd College. She's the NCWIT Graduate Mentoring Award recipient, as well as an AnitaBorg.org Emerging Leader Award recipient.
Thanks, I'm super thrilled to be here.
And our final panelist is Dr. Claire Horner-Devine, who I met a year ago at an organization a program that she coordinates called Lattice. She's the founder and principal consultant of Counterspace Consulting. And a lot of the work that she does is around leadership in STEM. In her consultancy, she works with science and social science and implementing those into spaces where leaders are facilitating workshops, and she's coaching teams and trying to help people find significance and value around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she is the diversity officer at the National Postdoctoral Association, and she also does coaching programs for inclusive leadership.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
Yay.
So to get us all started, one thing that's really, really been on my mind right now, as we're in these times where, lots of people are making statements about their commitments to Black Lives Matter and diversity. Well, two questions. Number one, why do you think everybody all of a sudden has this impetus to care? Because these sorts of atrocities have been happening for a while. So why now? And then two, how do we get everybody's buy-in? Like, what made you care? Like, how do we get other people to care? You can choose either of those to start chewing on.
Those are big. You might have to call on someone. They're scary.
I think when we are talking about racism, it's easier conceptually if we have a villain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in George Floyd's case, we have a murderer. We have like an explicit murderer. And I think that's much easier for us to wrap our head around. And then maybe I'm going to go there right away. With COVID, we have Black people disproportionately dying from COVID in the US, but we don't have a murderer. But we can look at the extent to which it is still caused by racism, by unequal access to education, unequal access to accumulation of wealth, unequal access to healthcare, that those same things are caused and driven by racism, but we don't have someone to call the murderer. And I think it reflects our instinct to focus on these things that have a clear person to blame. But I think when we're thinking about creating change within our spaces, we need to get just as mad about every Black person who died of COVID.
Mm-hmm. That's good, Colleen.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks, Colleen. I feel braver now that you. Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. Is that I think that there have been many murders of many Black people, and they've not been conceptualized as murders, and sometimes they've not even been conceptualized as crimes. Right. And I think one thing that happened with COVID is that people saw their system crack in a lot of ways. People who'd lived pretty secure, if not entirely secure, entirely comfortable lives, if not always feeling like capitalism treated them fairly, or that I think a lot of people, and let's just say a lot of white people, right, saw that the system could break in all kinds of places they didn't expect. There could be a disappearance of toilet paper. There could be, there could be risks that were never supposed to be there for us. There could be stores closing. There could be jobs disappearing. And it's, as a historian, I can't explain why people tolerated so much violence and hatred before, why they tolerated Trump as I think a really obvious villain and a really obvious, kind of focus for this. But I think COVID made people feel that the system was vulnerable, and that opened their eyes to the possibility that the system itself might not be what they thought it was. I want to stay far away from any judgments about Americans or even some sector of the American population being inherently good and finally willing to see extra. We can't go there. That's like when my students say, it's human nature. And I have to say, you don't get to use that explanation, right? That's not historical. But I agree. I think there's a new vulnerability, and it has made people truly more open to seeing violence and perhaps feeling empathy where they may never have seen it before. So I think it's the moment.
I want to add on to that, and I can't attribute the source, I'm sorry, but someone pointed out, like, oh, in England where there's a monarchy, no one thinks it's a meritocracy. They know that some people are born into royalty. Do you know what I mean? And I think that is a helpful, it's not just some level playing field where how hard you work is the thing that matters. And so it's, okay, sorry. Claire, were you going to chime in?
I was going to add, not from a scholarly perspective at all, because I don't think I have that to bring into this, but I think my sense as a white woman is that my privilege, our privilege, and I mean like me and other white people, we get to do a lot of stuff without fear. Without like real fear. Now we each have incidences of fear, like, of course, right? Hard things happen. I am afraid in particular situations, but this sort of pervasive sense of fear and trauma that is perpetuated by systems, that's central to our white privilege, right? And COVID, and living in the US, if you're not in a military family, and depending on where your family lives, if they don't live abroad, like you may or may not have had direct experience with this sort of national trauma of wars, right? So as a white person who's living right now, you can have, your fears can be very contained, bounded, I guess. Contained.
Yeah.
And I think that COVID is it's like, oh shit, there might not be yeast. There might not be toilet paper. That's the start. But then what that starts at as a white person, and I could be so off base in this, but just my train of thought is suddenly the things that we are assuming are always going to be there and that are easy, they're just not anymore. And so our sense of normal, as supported by the history of our country and systems, starts to like wiggle around a little. And at a certain point, I think there's just a tipping point where there's enough fear that you're willing, or you're not actually, I don't even think you're willing. The fear, it comes in. And other times we are really good, if there's anything white people are good at, is putting up boundaries, moving on, and not seeing the things that aren't like in our, that aren't threats to us in that way. So that's sort of my I think that's philosophical.
So you brought up something that I definitely wanted to ask you about, and that is the concept of white privilege. I received an email recently asking me, is there another term we could use if people get offended by the term white privilege? And so, of course, I had to shut my email down and sleep on it so I wouldn't respond in haste. But I responded, I think the next day or so, and I actually just kind of gave a discourse explaining what it means and what it doesn't mean, and ultimately said, I don't know any other term to use, what, so you just really kind of really placed it in context quite a bit, Claire, but what are your thoughts about that? What are you hearing and seeing in terms of people's willingness to acknowledge that, yeah, white privilege is real and it does impact how all of us experience our professions, our society, and so forth?
Yeah.
And maybe we want to define it too, just to be like a real accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Does someone want to?
Yeah.
Do you want
I
to,
think
Colleen, can you? Do you want to go for it?
A privilege is an unearned, unasked for advantage. And then I think of white privilege specifically as that, and that as a white person, I benefit from systems of racism because they don't target me.
And I just, if I can tie it back to that, the M word, meritocracy, I think meritocracy is a really self-consoling idea that makes it extraordinarily hard for the notion of something having been unearned or something being even, unasked for. It's just like, no, I am in this job and in this program and this, economic, stratum because of what I did, and that is white privilege, is the privilege of not having to doubt how that works. And so I think its operations are many and complex and really beautifully hidden. And the question before was, why did we come into thinking about these topics? And it's a great question because we don't have to, we live lives that do not require us to face anything about our position ever if we choose not to. But I was just gripped by the way that that science and engineering in particular, managed to evacuate the idea of power, evacuate the notion of privilege. How could there be a cultural sector where this was so thoroughly denied, right? And I just wanted to figure out, I didn't come in because I had a strong sense of justice. There's a lot I could have done with that. I did because I can't believe that science and technology get away with this. I guess so I wanted to figure that out, and it's connected to that privilege, I think.
Yeah, and one thing that I've heard of someone say is they took offense to the term because they thought it implied that and this person was a white man, so being a white man, that they had not experienced difficulties or hardships of any kind. And I'm like, that's not what it's about at all. It's just inherent and ingrained in the very foundation, and I call it the occupation of our country, that because your skin is white, people look at you, you're afforded an opportunity that people of color are not. When you are stopped by police, you're assumed innocent until proven guilty. Even if you just shot 9 people, you are carried in peacefully. Whereas if you're a person of color, you're automatically perceived as a threat of some kind. And so those things all come into play. Again, not to say you're a bad person, but that happens because strictly of the color of your skin. And so that's what I think there's some disconnect between what it is and what people receive it as.
Yeah, I think the issue too with scientists as well is that we're always thinking, okay, I need observable evidence. And if I haven't seen it, that means it didn't happen. And, there is an article that came out this week from an astronomer who actually said that he's like an emeritus faculty member. And he's like, I've never seen systemic racism in my life. And, and it's like, no, just because you have not been on the receiving end of systemic racism does not mean that it doesn't exist. So, and also that privilege word, people think it means, oh, white people are privileged. And that it's like, no, we're not saying that, it's everything we've been saying, that there's specific affordances. Yeah.
Still, it freaks me out to recognize that I feel insecure in my job posting, and to recognize that my whiteness was a material advantage, very likely, to every position I've gotten. I've worked hard. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't mean I don't work hard, but I still find it personally scary. And that's not dealing with those emotions is not something that's people of color's responsibility to like support me through. Like,
Right.
I need to do that by myself. But I do think that we can acknowledge that people can have some feelings there as long as they're not burdening people of color. And I particularly like a scholar, Sherry Watt, talks about the PI model, the privilege identity exploration model. And it talks about these different sort of modes of, you know, denial. And like, I think it's really helpful and I think more nuanced than we're seeing it in sort of common descriptions right now of just white fragility. I think we do need, as white women, need to worry about like bursting into tears about racism and taking up space. Like, it's okay to burst into tears about racism. You should be really mad. But you need to do that at home, where you're
and I think there's a beautiful little piece floating around by Holiday Phillips on what allyship is not, right? And it's just like 5 things it's not. And I can't bring them all to mind immediately, but one of them is it's not guilt, okay? Because where you're experiencing guilt and purging the guilt, right? You're taking care of yourself, right? And you're doing something that gives you resolution and you're deciding what counts as meaningful action, right? And I think that the fragility feeling and the crummy feelings, it's natural, it's human to feel that things are not as they should be and not to feel good if you may have responsibility, and accountability involves feeling crime. But the sense of guilt and relief is not on the path to social justice. That's on the path of, you know, being taken care of.
So each of you are here because you are allies. You're people that we see as having contributed to the support of minoritized individuals across this country. And your work is deeply meaningful to me personally, but I'm sure to several other people who have encountered your work. One of the questions that we have from someone who's listening, it's by Danielle Schroeder. She wants to know if you could speak a bit more about using your privilege as part of your allyship in diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM.
First of all, I feel like I just won an Emmy. Having you say that, thank you. I don't actually have a lot of awards like on my bio, but I feel like I just got one. Jeremy, thank you.
That's very nice. Yeah,
that is very gracious and kind. I'm sure there's so many ways I could be doing things differently and better. And I think the tricky thing about this allyship thing is that like you get to decide how you want to respond to any particular action. And your response is informed by what you know and what you don't know and the context and all the power in that situation, right? So in my life, I'm trying to do the best thing I can in a moment based on what I know so far, right? And sometimes that ends up as something that someone might call allyship, but other times it ends up as something that like might even cause harm, right? Like it's this whole navigating power and race and all our dynamics and the history of our country and many other countries in a given moment, right? All that stuff is present and you just have to do one or certain thing. It means that we mess up a lot. But I think the perspective I try and take is thinking a lot about when and where do I have power? When and where do I have influence? And with whom? And if I'm going to respond to something that's not react, I try not to react, although I have to say it's hard. But if I can give that space between all these stimuli and the response, right? And may get it to the response mode, in that tiny bit of time that passes there, to be asking myself, like, who is impacted by what I'm going to do? Who am I doing it on behalf of? Who's going to benefit? And just kind of have that sort of series of guiding questions that are based in my values and in where I am in my understanding of equity and inclusion. So how can what response are we going to take? And so I use that same approach if I'm in a professional setting and someone says something that I think could harm someone else. Or if I'm at my kid's school and I'm trying to figure out how to help explain to white parents that we want to have a dinner for our families of color to gather without white people, like being the person that stands in the front and is willing to take the heat is sometimes how I use my privilege, but always with that question of like, why am I doing this? Who's it going to benefit? What do I have to contribute? What power do I have here or not? And then making choices about what I do.
Yeah, I saw on, we had Monica Cox and a bunch of other fabulous leaders on last week. Thank you. And I saw on her probably her Twitter feed at one point, it was a picture of Marilyn Monroe, and I believe it was Billie Holiday.
Yes.
And it said, this is an example of using your privilege to someone's advantage. And basically it was that Marilyn Monroe would tell the club owners that she would come into their club and sit on the front row, which gave them a lot of, clout if they let, I think it was Billie Holiday sing. And so it was a matter of, okay, they won't let you in the front door, but hey, they'll let me in and I'm going to open the door for you. And so I thought that was a great example.
I just thank you so much, Claire, for stressing that allyship, from the position of white privilege. If you are not willing to take up the uncertainty and risk that allyship involves, you are really just reproducing the power and not the allyship. Because I think that there's an amazing quote from Rigoberto Gonzalez, who speaks for people of color. He says, we become stronger with allies. We don't get weaker without them. Right. And the point, which is it's there, it really grabs onto it, because if we have resources and voice that can come along, can be activated in ways that support, that's great, but we do not make the strength of other communities, right? We do not lend the strength. We do not infuse the strength, right? And so anything we do, I mean, there's lots of people talking about ally is not a noun, it's a verb, right? And you don't get to be an ally and then, have the label. It could change at any minute what you would need to do. And I'm not just a white, cisgendered, abled, tenured professor. I'm in humanities. Okay, I'm not in STEM. My job's in humanities, which is a place I think that often offers a safer space to talk about racism and anti-Blackness. I'm not saying it isn't a place where racism and anti-Blackness doesn't play out all the time, but I have a safer space to talk about it, and I try to make my classrooms safer spaces to talk about it, because for a kid to try to talk about that in a civil engineering class, it would be, I think, a really problematic, action. It's not problematic in my class. It's integral to the class. It's right. So I hope that's a way to use my space or my salary in a way, right? But maybe it'll be something different, tomorrow. Maybe that won't be helpful.
Mention a civil engineering classroom.
Sorry.
Let's talk about civil engineering.
Let's talk about it.
Awkward.
And I feel like I have so many pieces of privilege, it's hard to identify the white privilege in it. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, oh, of course we talk about racism in computer science classrooms. And of course people invite me to computer science departments, and then we talk about racism, but they don't know we're going to. Do you know what I mean? They're going to talk about diversity and inclusion. Do you know what I mean? And I think if you're talking about diversity and inclusion as it relates to Black people in the US, and you don't say the word slavery, I think you're not providing the full context. But I do think that I deserve a badge when I do what I think is the real white privilege work of allyship, is when I sit with a white person and they say racially harmful things. And we make progress. Do you know what I mean? And when they say racially problematic things, not harming a person of color, and that I listen and I empathize, and then I try to make progress with this person, those moments in private, I think I deserve a sticker for. But I think in general, the like, oh, allyship is listening. Allyship is making mistakes and learning from them.
Yeah.
And it's not a label that you get to put on yourself. But
Right.
I think the real allyship happens behind closed doors. Like, it's not a performance. That's not the,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
me not getting mad is a performance.
Yeah.
But that's not what we mean.
That's what the sticker is for,
Yeah,
Colleen.
exactly.
I just have this mental image of Colleen standing with taking all of these arrows in front, just like,
Right.
I'll take on all of the
That's
brunt
not
of
the
it.
thing is,
Well,
I haven't been harmed by these things. Do you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so they make me so mad, but they're, you know, sometimes with sexism, I just opt out. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, oh, you said a sexist thing. I'm not feeling it. Do you know what I mean? With racism, I need to be like, oh no, I need to listen to this garbage that you're saying and like try and make progress because
Right.
it doesn't hit a wound.
Yeah.
So I was going to talk about that. So as a Black female civil engineering undergraduate student, I experienced a lot of the things, you know, and so I went to the University of Florida in the South, and a lot of people don't think of Florida as the South. North Central Florida is the South, y'all.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's a lot of terms that you would hear as a person of color, like affirmative action, or that I'm just here taking up someone else's space because I didn't earn the right to be at the University of Florida. Or an example that I recently thought of, which blew my mind, and I was talking to Kyla about this, was when I was in high school, I told my guidance counselor, hey, I want to go to Georgia Tech for undergrad. And they were like, oh, you're not going to get into Georgia Tech. And I told him my backup school was the University of Florida. And he was like, you shouldn't apply there. I think you should just apply at UCF, the University of Central Florida. And I was like, okay, whatever, you know, fine. So I told my mom, and my mom was like, you're applying to all the places. And I applied, and I got into
mom power. Yeah. Yes, you did. Of course you did.
And I got in because of my GPA, my SAT scores, my extracurricular activities, you know, all the things that they actually look at for admissions, not because I'm Black or a woman, right?
Right.
And so when I get to undergrad and like these kids in my class are now asking me like, how did I get into the University of Florida? And we start comparing and we realize they're the ones who I should be asking, how did you get to Florida? It just became one of those things where it was just like, this is a problem. And it's like, it's so insidious.
It's so insidious.
The idea that affirmative action was still playing a role in me being in school is absurd. It's not something that had been in consideration for years.
I mean, and there is white privilege in the expectation that the people who do civil engineering will be white, right? Mm-hmm. There is white privilege in that. There is white privilege in the surprise that you might have the SAT score or the GPA that they didn't think you would have. I mean, I
think the word you're thinking of is racism.
Yeah.
Well, but I want to be careful because I feel like discrimination and exclusion and minoritization and marginalization don't capture the production of whiteness. They don't quite capture that what harms Black people helps white people. What harms disabled people helps able people. What harms women builds men. Right. And so that's kind of why I tried to write a book about the whiteness of engineering, because I didn't think that it was a matter of we need more, add women in STIR, add people of color in STIR, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, that which white people do is civil engineering, is mechanical engineering, is, fiber optics. That which people of color do is something else. Maybe it's aspirational engineering, but it's not the thing, right? Sorry, I'm off on my historical picture, but
No, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Claire.
No, you go.
No, I was going to say that's exactly right. It's this whole marginalization and really minimalization of what it is. And I love Jeremy has a T-shirt instead of underrepresented. Underrepresented is scratched out and it says underestimated. And
nice.
That's a lot of what happens. I know. And Jeremy, you talk about being impacted like that as an undergrad. How about being me? Well into an over decade long career and having a colleague say to my face that, you have the most secure job here. You're a Black woman with a disability. If anything happens and folks start getting laid off, you're not going anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
I can't.
So I'm there because I checked 3 boxes, not because and I at that point had taken a non-tenure track position and was still running circles around them in research dollars.
Right.
So it's like I'm not there because of that kind of stuff.
No.
And because of all these awards and stuff that I'm getting for being a Black disabled woman. So yeah, it still happens. It still happens. I'm 25 years in now and it still happens.
And I want to add to that too. And I know, Jeremy, you've definitely spoke about this in the past, where whenever we think about initiatives and programs for people of color, it's always from a deficit mindset. We need to give them more because they don't have enough. But, if you want to speak about your own experience with one of the programs coming from high school where they're like, no, you don't know this stuff. You don't know that. And it's like, no, I know it, but this place is still toxic. It's not what I'm lacking. It's what this place is lacking. Sorry, I said the thing for you.
No, it's fine. It's one of those things where, and I don't think that it's something that we do knowingly, right? Because even people who are Black ascribe to this, right? They do this too. So, we have these phenomenal programs that are supposed to support underrepresented groups and offer training and mentorship and guidance and all of these things. There are ways in which you can approach that make people feel lesser than. So it's, you don't have the ability to do this. Let me pair you with someone who does, because without it, you wouldn't be able to do this on your own. Or, you know nothing. This is an advisee thing, right? You know nothing. Let me show you how to do all of the things because I'm the holder of the knowledge. And without me, you'll never get this degree.
Right.
It's just something that we do. But I experienced it more because I was Black and people would make assumptions that I didn't have stuff because I was Black when I came from a more affluent community. And so I was not someone who didn't have stuff. I had a lot of the things, but I also had Black skin.
Yeah.
So just one thing about the educational setting is one thing I really try to do to my classes is to kind of break that fourth wall and sort of I taught, no matter what the topic is, I try to kind of come in very early in meeting any class and saying, okay, let's talk for a second about how come I get to decide what we talk about and how come I'm at the front of the room and you're in the chairs, and what are the benefits of that? What does that keep us back from? Right. And then I'm like, okay, so again, probably this isn't something that is a topic in most of your classes because this happens to be a class about society or about history or about the history of knowledge, because I do a lot of history of science and engineering. Right. And what I really hope that is a way that then lets them go into other classes and maybe even jobs, and where these things aren't made explicit, where the power relations are not acknowledged, but they can know that they're right in detecting those patterns and those power relations, and they could be supportive or they could be racist, but you're not wrong to see that as a flow of power. You're not wrong to be experiencing it as, minoritizing and diminishing and insulting. Right? It will be silence that you're experiencing it, but it's not incorrect that you are experiencing it.
Yeah. I have a question, I guess, building on that whole idea of the power structures that Amy's talking about. And Claire, maybe I'll direct it to you first, because I know you do a lot of leadership coaching and training and development and things like that. And there is this big concern about the power differentials. It can be for, in the sense of minority populations versus majority. It could be in sense of student and faculty or whatever. And I just wonder, and this is a big elephant of a question, so I'm going to let you cut it up, and take whichever bite you want to out of it.
Fantastic. I love eating. I love to eat elephants.
Okay,
good. So good.
So the big elephant of a question is, when you're coaching about leadership in this inclusive leadership, how do you address this with your clients in terms of, and I'm imagining a lot of your clients may be university administrators and faculty and so forth. How do you address that power differential with them and talk about inclusive leadership in that way?
Now I get the elephant parts. It's big. That's huge. It's huge. That's such a good question. I'm thinking about what Amy just said, just about how she brings the conversation about the fourth wall. And I was like, I don't know what the fourth wall is, but now I know. Now I know what you're talking about. So thank you for saying that. But but it's in effect, it's talking about power, right? Yeah. So who has the power there? So I was thinking that one thing I see being effective for people, and again, just in the slice of life that I get access to, but is just making things a little bit more explicit, right? So we don't talk about whiteness. We don't talk about power. We don't talk about all the other suite of social identities that all of us bring into all of our interactions. And just how, again, like how much our past individual and cultural impacts current moment. So I think that I'm super extroverted, so I'm really just thinking out loud right now. So we'll see where I land on this. But I think that what I do that sometimes works is try and find a way to ask a question that taps into some of that. Whatever I think it is, whatever I'm aware of at the time, and whatever it is, I think that person, that group, that community might be ready to chew on, right? So it's like you can't stretch people too far, or they snap, and then what's the point? But like, what's the nudge piece? And sometimes it's, I'm thinking about people, sort of like maybe some leaders or even just managers in tech companies, even, where just reminding them or asking them, like, what kind of power stuff might be going on with that conversation? And they're like, oh, I don't have any power. And I'm like, you're the boss. Yes, you have power. What are you kidding? Like, you're the boss. So you can't actually have that conversation with the person unless you admit, I know this is hard because I'm the one who decides on your, just like making things a little bit more explicit. So that, what's the actual question depends on the person, but just kind of asking about, like, what's that going to be like for the other person if you're talking about X in that conversation? How might that conversation be different if you have it with a peer? How might that conversation be different if they had that with a peer?
So interesting.
So just thinking about who is in the particular conversation, and then people will be like, oh, I'm thinking about race. It's all race, and you're like, and all the other things that intersectionality is really important, and we have these systems, right, that really impact how people experience the world. And don't forget about right here and now. Like, don't get all stuck in, I'm trying to be woke and like, I'm aware of race, and forget that you're the boss or you're the manager, or and you might have a great relationship, but there's power, right? So trying to remind people, like, where are you powerful? And you're not going to hear the whole story if you're the one in power. Like you're just not, and except in very unique situations. So if you think there's more to that story, how can you help that person? How can you make it happen so they can share it with someone? Or how can you make them have access to what you think you might be blocking, or something like that? So that's kind of vague, because it's like depends. Is the short answer.
Yeah, it was. I left it wide open, so that's good. That's good.
And I'm glad that we hit on the point of like this piece of allyship, of asking people questions that can help them recognize their positionality in a situation and within a larger context. And I think that's like the behind the scenes work. Do you know what I mean? Is asking like the little nudge. Do you know what I mean? Away from other people where they might say something hurtful and people aren't going to be harmed. I think those questions are really key.
Yeah, I have a question. It's in the context of training, but also for, engineering and STEM education. So if I have to go or hear about or attend another unconscious bias training after this, I'm going to die, because right now at this point in America, it's no longer unconscious bias. Like you are consciously biased if you're doing this. So I was just like, what is the new training going to look like? Because we're getting boot camp right now, in America at home. So yeah, Amy, where are you going to?
I just have to. Okay, so I will confess that my new book is completely disproving my last book, which is not a good thing to admit, because then people are like, well, why did I pay for the last one? But I think part of what I've learned in kind of moving up with my kind of research into very current kinds of programming, STEM, inclusion, minority engineering programming now, is that it is very much pivoting on this notion of diversity, inclusion, and equity as a very kind of a multicultural, a pluralistic thing. And in its very most, I think, disturbing incarnation, even things like color brave. I don't know if you've run into that, right? And the premise,
brave.
Shall I describe this very briefly?
No.
Yes.
No.
Please don't.
Just keep going on your main point.
Well,
main point.
The essence of it is that it is trademarked. So Color Brave TM.
Wow.
And my university, I think, bought off the shelf some program, whatever. But it involves that you meet you. I cannot even verbalize this without my blood pressure going through, but it's like you go to these events and there's a person, there's an African-American person, there's a Muslim person, there's a disabled person, there's a LGBTQIA+ person, and you can ask them questions to learn more about them and be less afraid of difference, right? I am not making this up, and I have lived through several of these, and like it was just, so sorry, I know. And it's like, I will not even tell you some of the things that happened at these events, but the premise is that it's just tolerance is what we need, and acceptance and welcoming. And as long as we don't feel a discriminatory impulse, as long as we don't experience ourselves as biased, everything is fine. So Kyla, I think what I'm saying is it's worse in a way. It's a kind of self-consoling. I now am sort of really starting to understand that a lot of this kind of programming is really about racial reconciliation as opposed to, reparative justice or reparations, right? Yeah. And I'm so sorry to be saying this, but I think it's actually has a new disguise that's even somewhat more frightening to me, which is this post-racial, it's this post notion that as long as everybody
it already,
right. So I'm sorry, but that's kind of what that.
And for our listeners who are like, oh, but that seems like a good idea. I recognize the limitations of my perspective, and I would like to hear from them so I can understand their perspectives. You're right if you have that instinct, and the answer is that you find an author who has written a book about their experience, and then you read their experience, because you are right to think that you're missing something without hearing their voices.
Google is
and
real.
you listen to some really good podcasts, like for example.
Yes, yes.
You know, that I have so many thoughts of what everyone was just saying, but I'm gonna just go to one very particular one that's kind of short. And this is to kind of circling back, Yvette, to Kyla, your original question of like kind of why is everyone noticing this now? What's going on? And I right there I just said everyone, and I think I did not mean everyone. I meant white people and non-Black people of color. So I mean, we're like, oh, I just said that, right? That's a mistake. I apologize, and I will try not to do that again. But what I'm hearing from the academic world, it is an awakening, you know, of many people. Some of them had their head in the sand. Some put blinders on. Some knew and were too busy with other things, you know, whatever the reason. Everyone has a reason. And many more people in academia of all races and ethnicities, but you know, higher proportion of white people than ever, maybe, or in my lifetime ever, are like, oh shit, it's for real, you know, I gotta do something about it. And I'm being called to do something in my career about it. I never had to do that. Other people were doing that, right? The diversity committee or the person of color in my department. And so they're like, come do an unconscious bias training, you know, or come bring in this expert. And it's like, I keep having this feeling like, you know, like the train has been going for 400 or 500 years, right? You know, like find a train car that's open and jump on it, like get on it, right? Like better late than never, I guess. And then I'm not going to say out loud all the emotions and feelings that even I have of like, are you kidding? Right? That's an entire podcast, but I'm not going to take that much time. But get on and then slow down, because this stuff is deeply, deeply entrenched in the way many of us think and in all of our systems, the way we learn, the way we teach our children, all everywhere, right? And so it is not a fire that we are just going to put out with a big hose tomorrow. So we're so glad you're here, but there's so much learning for all of us to do. So slow down, listen, talk to people. Don't start your own nonprofit tomorrow. You know, like just do and then so like slow the heck down. That is my first, like hurry up and then slow down is the first message that I feel like I'm sharing with some people, and I'd like to share more broadly. The other is do not ask a person of color, right? and don't hire like some scholar, you know, like let's get Kimberly Crenshaw in here to tell us about intersectionality. I'm like, wait, hold on, right now, like don't ask her. I don't care how much you pay her to come in and give you a 101. Like especially in academia, you are a PhD, you are incredibly smart, and you know how to find things out on your own. I think someone said this, maybe Dr. Monica Cox in the last podcast, like, do your work, figure it out, get on the databases, read the papers, open Twitter. Like there's so much you can do on your own. Once you have done some work and had some conversation with your other friends who may or may not know much, and you figure out like, what do you know? What do you don't know? Then pay somebody to come in when it's worth their time, because you're beyond like bio 101. So you can really understand population genetics. Don't get the expert to come in when you're still like, okay, genes or what? Like, how is that different from a chromosome? Like,
that is an excellent
don't waste your time.
Right. We can do special topics. We're not doing
that's also
those are some of the thoughts that I just had to get out there today.
But that's also kind of a white privilege, was like, I have curiosity. Let's feed my. I wish to hug you. I wish to respect you. I'm here to respect you. And you're like, yeah. And I have to say that I've learned so much from queer studies and disability studies, because that set of questions has so often sort of been like the kind of in the last 30, 40 years, you know, there is such disgust and such curiosity and such pity and such, you know, such undisguised revulsion and othering that happens in the day-to-day interaction so often, and the very act of, you know, people thinking they should know you and know who you are and know what you experience, right? That I'm really starting to understand that is an act of violence, right? That whether it's guessing, you know, whether it's needing to know, well, where are you from, or how'd you get into this program, or wait, you know, how'd you end up in engineering as a Black woman, or you know, you're, well, what is it? You appear to have a vision problem. Can you see a lot? Can you say, why are you using a phone? I mean, the compulsion to know each other in this kind of very, very, I think, violent way has become so clear to me. And I am super excited now to see all of these kind of critical studies coming together, and the questions of LGBTQ, you know, experiences and disabilities, scholarship and race. It's all coming together, and it's beyond just intersectionality. It's questions that have been raised sort of all melding together now. And it's yeah. Sorry, I went off there, but I was just like,
no, but that's very valid, because when we talk about, one of the things in an article I recently posted on LinkedIn about I can't breathe and this is why, one of the things that I say is that we start to step up to help make a change when we see inequities happen to people we care about. And so what happens is, if our circles are too uniform, we don't get to see the people who look like me and who look like Kyla and who look like Jeremy, who are being marginalized and abused and just experiencing all of these things, because we don't have all this variety in our circle. And so one of the recommendations I had in that article was get to know people. And I'm glad you differentiate here. It's not, okay, Yvette, and you know, I don't mind. I love when little kids notice my disability. Before I was using a mobility scooter all the time, kids would just notice that I walked funny, and most adults wouldn't even pay attention, or they wouldn't say anything. But if a kid came and asked me, I would sit down and I would talk to them, because I remember how I was bullied because of it when I was a kid. So I'm like, if this kid understands that it's okay, you know, I'm normal. But they ask me questions. That's one thing. But when I say get to know people, it's about getting to know you as a person, and to value you as a person and all the richness that you bring, hopefully richness that you bring to the world. And that's very different from, oh, you're the Black person I know.
Right.
Tell me about that. You know, it's very, very different.
Yeah. Or, oh, look, I have someone who uses a wheelchair working in my lab. Right. It's all good. Right. And it's like, well, okay, this is the categories and the taxonomies and box ticking are really, they're not about structural change. Right. And I'm sure you guys have often, you know, thought about how the entry of the minoritized person into the setting where they were not previously, you know, I mean, climate and, you know, you've bumped into the wording, the phrases that have made it clear that place didn't change when the person walked in.
Colleen, we are finishing up here, and you are the only person who hasn't really given us a final thought on things. So I want to point the conversation to you.
You know, I've been working on this project, BPCnet, Broadening Participation in Computing.net.org. So the NSF has this new thing where computer scientists, when they apply for a grant, some of them have to write a BPC plan. And it's like all these people who don't know anything and don't care. But I'm like totally into it, because I'm like, oh, I'm ready. And so I've been working a lot on BPCnet to be like, how can I help them find something that seems like easy to do, that helps them see the humanity of others, that helps them get motivated, that helps them do the behind the scenes work that a person of color doesn't need to do. One of my mantras for my coworker is, Beth, could a white person do this for you? because I think like the D&I, like I'm not gonna stand up at Harvey Mudd and at the Women of Color, admissions night. Like I'm not gonna do that work. We're stuck. She needs to do that work. But I can hire the caterer and I can, do you know what I mean? And so figuring out how can we get these people who now have this structural incentive through the NSF to do something, how can I get them to do meaningful work that puts them on the right path? And I think that's been an interesting and fun thing. And I'm ready to swallow my anger and welcome them in, be like, you care now, let's do this.
Can you share a little information on that, like on Twitter, Facebook, like on the various platforms that you guys are all over the place and you're like more savvy about that than I am, but I would love to, I want to look that up, but I also want to be able to share that with others that I know, because I think that's for some people don't know where to start, and rather than turning away because of not knowing or being afraid, like that's a great place to say, like, come on in, I got an idea for you. You can pay for this program, which is already up and running and amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Put your money there.
You can review scholarship applications for a diversity conference. Do you know what I mean? And it is going to expose you to the brilliance of the people applying for that I think is going to do the labor that otherwise is falling only to minoritized groups. Like, this crew, we don't need to review those scholarship applications. So we don't, do you know what I mean? But
and the other part is making sure that the doors are open at the mainstream conferences, so that people don't feel limited to have to submit. And the same thing, Quincy and I talk about this a lot with awards. We get nominated for the Black Engineer of the Year awards, but can we get nominated for the Engineer of the Year awards? And so, but I do think that starting in that space opens people's eyes to say, well, wow, there is some brilliance here. And that they wouldn't see otherwise. And maybe then they can take that, and going back to Danielle's question, that privilege that they have to open this door in this other space to say, well, now let's open this door over here. So, man, I think is our time up already?
Don't go.
I know, right?
Modern Figures podcast.
Oh, look, it's my slide.
I love it.
We've come full circle, everyone. Modern Figures podcast is elevating the voices of Black women in computing to inspire the next generation of the advanced technology workforce. You can find more about our podcast at www.modernfigurespodcast.com. And we're also all over social media and on all of the places that you could subscribe to podcasts, really.
Yeah. And if you are wondering, hey, what happens if I, sign up? It's basically a conversational style podcast where we bring in Black women from, the Black women in computing community, because surprise, surprise, there's hundreds of us. Hey, Silicon Valley. But
we do exist.
We're not here, but we're here. We're doing things. We're getting degrees. Point your attention in this direction. So it's conversation style, very much like this one. It's fun. I love recording it. And Yvette?
Engineering Change podcast, which is the baby podcast in this duo here. But Engineering Change is focused on just what it says, applying a very systematic, iterative, user-centered process to changing things towards diversity, equity, and inclusion in engineering, built on 3 pillars that are combined in one concept, which is redefine engineering education. So image who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering, silo our academic programs and problem solving, and fine tune our climate and culture so that everyone can succeed. And so we release every other Wednesday. Today was a release date. Dr. Monica Cox is my guest today on episode 4. Yay. So please listen to that when you get a chance. And also I have to add a correction. I showed the wrong title for one of her books last week. And so her book is called Excellence. Why being average is never, now I'm missing up the second half, but look for Monica Cox Excellence. because I don't have it right in front of me. But anyway.
And you'll find excellence there, right? Yeah.
There
totally,
you go.
Totally.
There you go. Sorry, Dr. Cox, I did it again, but I got the first word right this time. They'll find it. It's on Amazon.
Why being average is never an option.
There you go. Thank you. But if you go to my website, engineeringchangepodcast.com, you'll find a link to it there and a bunch of other resources. So I would like to once again thank our guests for being with us tonight. Thank you for your time and your patience with the technical challenges. Thank you to the audience for joining us. And I do want to shout out Stephen Seekules from FIU. He put a comment in here. He said, I love the hurry up and slow down point. I have been telling lots of white friends asking what to do. Just keep paying attention, keep caring after the point when it becomes easier not to.
Yes.
I think we find the right ways to help through long-term engagement.
Oh,
and
that's
so
good.
Yes,
he's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Shout out to my brother who's also on here.
Yeah.
Hi, brother.
And I see Sue Walden on here. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Sue.
Good to see you.
Hey.
And Danielle, and I see some of my family, Jaquin, and wow, we have a lot of folks on today. So thank you. Shadrach Stevens. I've heard that we definitely need to connect. So please reach out. So thank you everybody for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Lots of fun.
Thanks. It's great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.